So this chapter I was able to summarize quickly, so let's get started on chapter 9, Out-Migration, the third move. As they were closing, they as in the War Relocation Authority, were closing the permanent compounds, they were told not to congregate with each other, not to speak Japanese, not to talk about their camp experience. However, when they returned to the West Coast, they were also told by the community that they're non-American. So, who are they? Okay, trial releases, spring 1942, educators, industrialists, cultural leaders, church leaders. They called for the release of college-age students so they can attend college universities outside the camp. From their efforts, 250 were allowed to live outside the military zone. Christian groups offered financial aid. Around this time, Nisei were given short-term leave from the camps to work in the agricultural professions. Employees were responsible for the transportation and safety. However, in terms of housing, they were reduced to a shack without any running water. On the other hand, the pay came in handy, and they felt satisfied that they're contributing to the war effort. Most who took this opportunity were men. Parole to limited freedom. This program proved successful. This way, the opinion that all Japanese Americans have proven their loyalty and pushed for the closure of all the compounds. It also pushed the entire nation to provide them jobs. This was no longer the rationale for imprisoning them. Moreover, it cost the taxpayers $90 million to set up and maintain these compounds from 1942 to 1942. However, before they could release all of them, each person had to prove that they have the means to support themselves, as well as show proof that they are welcome in whatever community they decide to settle. Each person were given a code of conduct booklet. They must carry identification with them at all times. Don't speak Japanese in public, even if they think no one's listening. If any business refuses to let them patronize, they're not to show their irritation, they're not to demand their rights. Be careful what they say. Be extremely courteous to everyone they come into contact with, and they're not to show anything that indicates that they were imprisoned. To the armed service. 1942, the War Department reinstated selective service to all male Japanese Americans. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, 5,000 of them were already in the services, but after the attack, only Japanese Hawaiians were recruited to join the 100th Infantry Battalion. The following year, 1943, January, Japanese Americans who were in prison were recruited to join the 447th Regimental Combat Team. The questionnaire that they had to fill out to join this team created more controversy than it helped them in their recruitment efforts. Number 27 asked the men whether or not they wanted to serve in the armed forces. For the women, they were asked whether or not they wanted to volunteer. Number 28 asked whether or not they swore allegiance to the United States and the United States only. For Nisei, once again, they had to prove their loyalty. For the Issei, number 27 was idiotic, while number 28 put them in the weak and insubstantial position. The reaction was swift, intense, started heated debates in the mess halls. If they say yes, they are loyal to Japan. However, if they say no, they admit to being disloyal from the beginning. So either way, they're in danger of being labeled traitors and deported to Japan. So after this was brought to the attention of the army changed the wording. Will you swear to abide by the laws of the United States and take no action which would in any way interfere with the war effort? Even though the wording was changed, the Nisei were still angry at being forced to answer both questions. Regardless of how they answered, they would be separated from their parents. Either they will be moved to a maximum security concentration camp, Tule Lake, or they will be forced to serve their country in an army outside the country, either the European curtain or the Asian, the Pacific theater. Ms. Iyama was interned at Topaz. When the loyalty questionnaires were distributed, the Isenkibe advised everyone to answer no to both questions, which is understandable. Fearing a disturbance, she stood up, asked everyone to stay calm, and she told them to let each person decide on their own. However, there was backlash when the Issei told her father that it's his fault for educating a girl. As a result, she and her father stay away from them for the remainder of the internment. Rather than settle their loyalty, these questions only reveal their motives for the actual answers. Secretary of War used their answers to justify segregating the inmates based on their answers to the loyalty questionnaire. Tule Lake Segregation Center. This permanent compound was created for every man who either failed to register or join the army or answer no to the loyalty questionnaire. Some men who answered yes were sent to other camps for military training. Some women whose husbands or fathers were sent to Tule Lake found this maximum security compound even more oppressive than the regular camp. The men were either angry, frightening, or intimidating. The army brought 1,200 men with 8 tanks, tear gas. Soldiers were armed with submachine guns. The camp housed 18,000 inmates, 68% of which were citizens. Ms. De Cristoforo's then husband and father, and her father as well, answered no to the loyalty questionnaire. So regardless of how she answered, she was also sent to Tule Lake with them. So she chose not to answer because her job is to keep the entire family together, including their 3 children, no matter what. And Tule Lake, she went through a series of heartbreaking losses. After the war, those left behind in Tule Lake were eligible for relocation. The other volunteered to go back to Japan, or they were forced to do so. Sadly, her mother-in-law died from cancer. Her then husband was deported to Japan. Her father-in-law died in Japan. He never recovered from having his property in Japan permanently frozen. Her parents were in Hiroshima when the atomic bomb was dropped. Her father died immediately. Her mother was severely burned. Since there wasn't any way she could support her 3 children by herself, she made the decision to send her 2 older children back to the United States, while she and her youngest child stayed behind in Japan. Now, keep in mind, her husband, who was deported back to Japan, ended up marrying somebody else and having children by this other woman. So that's why she became a single parent. The fact that she decided to send her 2 older children back to the States left a permanent rift between her and her 2 older children. Ms. Okamura was in a similar no-win situation. 4 of her children were already in Hiroshima during the war. Her husband was an Issei. She didn't want any harm to come to her children who were in Japan, so she wrote neutral to the loyalty questionnaire. The army interpreted her answer as no. They sent her to the Tule Lake. After the war, she was forced to renounce her citizenship so she could be reunited with her children who were in Japan. Her husband stayed behind the States so he can recover the financial losses from being incarcerated. When she arrived in Hiroshima, her in-laws were angry with her. Why did she come back? There isn't enough food for her and her children. Back in Hollister, her mother was a housewife. Now in Japan, her mother had to do manual labor in Japan. Her workday in Hiroshima started at 2 a.m. selling goods at the open market. On her way home, she had to haul a wagon full of human fertilizer over hills and dirt roads. She had to do that for 10 years. So for 10 years, both of her parents tried very hard to return to the United States. Although her brother was stationed in Hokkaido, he also tried to return. Each person they met could not help them. Finally, 1949, her father was able to return to California. They were able to send 2 of the children to Hawaii, and the family was separated by the Pacific Ocean. Mrs. N was able to find a U.S. senator who helped her and her children return to the States. Their citizenship was restored with the help of an attorney. 10 years after the war ended, the family was finally reunited in the United States. Understandably, Ms. N requested to the author to remain anonymous. Permanent releases. Men in the armed services. Many left the barbed wire to serve in the armed forces. The men, a significant number, served to prove their loyalty. January 1944, the military draft was reinstated for all Japanese Americans. Many volunteered and did comply with draft orders. Most had the attitude of, what else can we do? 100th Infantry Battalion, Japanese Hawaiians, 447th 2nd Regimental Combat Team. Their successful missions were known worldwide. Those in the military intelligence service served in the Pacific Theater, offering their translation services. The spouses, many of the wives went with their husbands to the base at Fort Snelling, Minneapolis. One woman worked as a living domestic with a German couple with 3 children. Although they never met a Japanese person before, they were good to them. Women in the armed services, with the success of the Nisei Army, women were also given the opportunity to serve. Some worked as domestics, others were sent to Washington to translate documents, yet still others contributed to the morale of the servicemen stationed in Hawaii by singing and engaging in light chatter. Out to work. Mid-1943, number of people who were allowed to go outside steadily increased with indefinite leave clearance from the camp's project director rather than having to go all the way back and forth to Washington. To help Japanese Americans reintegrate, the War Relocation Authority started a public announcement campaign. They used churches and civil organizations to allay people's fears, set up programs to meet the needs of Japanese Americans. Chicago, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Des Moines set up hostels run by church groups. Their hard work helped the Nisei. There were job offers from trade girls to local hospitals, nurses being offered a salary plus meals and laundry. For the next several months, the number of help wanted ads for Japanese Americans that they needed to fill continued to increase. Domestic workers were among the most frequent job listings. Ms. Rudden went east to Minnesota. She and her husband found a job. They found Minnesota friendly and warm. They also found an apartment. By July 1942, 2,500 found work and a place to live in Chicago. Japanese Americans demonstrated their efficient workers, and general acceptance of them spread in many communities across the country. Ms. Kawamoto went to Chicago, fresh out of high school, wearing a homemade suit and homemade shoes. Through a friend, she got a job and a place to live. About a year later, she was able to send over her mother and brother. Sadly, this was not the case for everybody. Ms. Yasuda, her husband was a hardworking man with a successful farming career, but he struggled to find work. His attempt at sharecropping with a family in Colorado failed. They lost everything. Another sharecropping opportunity also turned sour. They ended up sharing a 1-bedroom hovel with his brother and their 2 children. The winters were bone-chilling. They were destitute. She kept getting pregnant. When she was ready to deliver her 3rd baby, they had to travel all the way to Denver to have the baby, leaving behind their 2 children with strangers. After she had her baby, they returned to the 2 children, and she saw their destitute faces. She broke down and cried. Students, many women took advantage of scholarships offered by colleges and universities in the Midwest and East. Others relied on their families to pay for their education. Since nurses were in high demand, many prepared for that career. Sadly, Ms. Sato's experience was not uncommon. She had a bachelor's degree in biology, but she was turned down because of her race. However, she was strengthened from learning how to deal with the outside world without the cushion of a supporting community and comfort from family and friends. End of exclusion. By the end of 1944, 36,000 already left the permanent compound. The 2 all-Japanese American military team success had gone a long way toward promoting acceptance. The Allied defense in the Pacific was also going well. Those in Tule Lake also mitigated concerns about possible treachery and sabotage. Over the next several months and years, most started the long trek back to the West Coast. Misuya Endo, she was working for the state of California as a typist. In the wake of the attack on Pearl Harbor, she was fired. A JACL leader hired a lawyer assigned to her case to try to prevent any more people from losing their jobs. The lawyer tried to seek the freedom of the Nisei. He chose her because her brother was in the army. Her parents never returned to Japan. They felt she represented a loyal American. The Supreme Court ruled that she was entitled to be released from Topaz, that she has the right to move freely from state to state, including California. She finally left in 1945, June. She stayed behind because the attorney and all the Japanese Americans needed her to stay there, to prove that, she did not deserve to be fired from her job, and she deserves to be released from the permanent compound. The residue, other than 18,000 Tule Lake, they were allowed to leave the compound. However, many chose to stay. Some of them, it's because they have parents, children, sick family members to take care of. Miss Amano's husband was drafted along with her brother. She just had a baby girl, so alone, no place to go. She's trapped. She's forced to stay in Machi. Early 1945, everyone was told all the compounds would be closed by the end of the year. That summer, the United States dropped 2 atomic bombs in Japan. There was another reason why she chose to stay behind. She doesn't have enough money to pay for the living expenses, and she doesn't have a home to go home to. To that end, the War Relocation Agency found her a home in Rodeo, Northern California. Although they boarded the train that stopped briefly at Fresno, the restaurant there did not welcome them. They did not make a fuss. They bought sandwiches somewhere else. For the next 2 years, she lived in public housing until she could get back on her own 2 feet. Eventually, she and her husband raised 4 children who were successful in their careers. These women are female heroes. Their families survived and thrived due to their strength and tenacity. They also had a long comment with women who were physically assaulted. They were forced to submit, forced to carry nameless guilt that would prevent them from talking about their experience for many years to come. They were also forced into a code of silence. But with healing comes renewal. So questions, comments, constructive criticisms, ask for clarification, let me know. And when I summarize the next chapter, I'll make that video. Take care.